I've played a lot of Pokemon fan games. Some nearly perfect, some slightly above average, and a few that have just left a bad taste in my mouth. So I thought it would be fun to rank them all in a tier list. But before we jump in, I wanted to add a rule. In this video, I'll only be talking about completed projects. And that's for two reasons. First, I feel it's a bit unfair to rank something that's obviously going to be much better once it's finished. And more importantly, I'd also have over 100 games to list off. Plus, I figured you'd all prefer to hear about the actually completed ones anyways. Going over the tiers real quick, S tier will be the projects that I found to be some of the most enjoyable experiences with a Pokemon game. If it wasn't obvious, this video and list will be mostly opinionated. A tier is for games that are very good, but not nearly as perfect as the ones in S. B tier is for your above average games. Not bad, but not insanely good either. C tier is for the very average games that don't have anything crazy or really unique about them, but will still serve as a fun experience. And finally, D tier, which are projects that I had a hard time finding anything good to say about. If you're wondering why there isn't an F tier, well, considering these are free-to-play fan games made mostly out of passion, I didn't think it would be fair to put any of them at that low of a level. Now, onto the games. We'll be going in reverse alphabetical order in the spirit of Legend ZA releasing later this year, starting with Pokemon Zeta. This is a classic fan game released all the way back in 2013, when there weren't many others. It had Pokemon from the first 5 generations, and even followers. It was pretty good for its time, but 12 years later, it hasn't aged very well, with very generic music and tileset choices, making most of the routes feel identical to each other. Not to mention, the story isn't anything to write home about, but it's still entirely bug-free and a decent way to pass the time if you have nothing else to do, so I'll be putting it in the C tier. Next up, we have Pokemon Xenoverse, arguably one of the most well-known fan projects ever made, with a brand new region, characters, and Pokemon. Now, on my first playthrough of it, back in July of last year, I wasn't very fond of it. I thought the gameplay and story were boring, and it was just a really difficult game to finish. But specifically for this video, I decided to jump back into it. I didn't have the time for a full playthrough, yet I found myself enjoying it a lot more than I did before. I'm not sure what it was, but maybe the positives just spoke to me a little louder this time around. The character art is very pretty, and the animated Pokemon sprites are incredibly impressive. I think the game is far from perfect, with a few poorly written characters, and a lot of evolutions being locked to the late game, or 1% item drops, but I can't really see myself putting it below A tier. It's an incredible labor of love, and there's a reason why many other people, especially YouTubers, hold it so highly. But an even more popular fan game, with a brand new region and roster of Pokemon, is Uranium. Now, my opinions on this game are a bit weird, because in 2016, it felt impossible for something like it to exist. It had a beautiful new region, a new story, and over 100 new and unique Pokemon. Sure, there were other projects like it at the time, but none of them sat in a nearly completed state like Uranium did. But 9 years later, and I feel like the game just hasn't aged very well. The world and Pokemon still look incredible, but on the gameplay side, it just feels very grindy. You gain EXP very slowly, which, ironically, punishes you for trying to use a lot of the new Pokemon at once. On top of that, they also take way too long to learn useful moves. Because of the slow EXP gain, the early game lasts way longer than it should. As much as I don't want to, I'm going to be putting it in the B tier. It's a game heavily in need of a quality of life update, but despite the game having a new development team, it just hasn't received one. Let's move on to our first game going in the S tier, Pokemon Tectonic. Tectonic has an extremely high focus on battles, as it reworks every Pokemon and nearly every move, so every one of your team members will have access to a wide variety of unique attacks. And while that might seem overwhelming, Tectonic counteracts that feeling with an in-game guide for literally everything, which is especially useful in battle, being able to see the stats and learnable moves of the Pokemon you're fighting or trying to capture. And even outside of battle, you'll have a brand new region to explore that's nicely decorated with a Generation 4 art style about and following Pokemon. There's a lot to say about Tectonic, which is why I've even made a full video about it, but it's such an awesome fan game that I seriously believe makes every Pokemon battle fun, so it definitely deserves to be an S tier. If you're anything like me, and are a huge fan of Fakemon, then you'll probably love this next game, called Solar Light and Lunar Dark, as it introduces over 300 new Pokemon across its massive region. Now, as great as that sounds, it's a very old game that's held back by a lot of issues. There's a pretty obvious quantity over quality approach to the new Pokemon, which isn't that bad, but a lot of them do have very simple designs and a sort of round complexion. As for the story, it's alright, but it's very lackluster, leaving you with a climax that had less to offer than even the older official games. Finally, there's just a huge lack of quality of life, so trying to train more than just a single team of 6 might feel like a chore. It's a game that I look back on very fondly, and it's one I'd love to put higher, but in its current state, I'll have to put it in the B tier. Moving on to Shattered Light. This is a very basic fan game where you play as a Pokemon trainer and travel the region collecting 8 gym badges. There are Pokemon from the first 8 generations to capture, and a pretty uneventful story that makes the experience only around 8 hours long. But it's almost entirely bug-free and very casual friendly, so I think it can sit safely in the high C tier. Next up is Pokemon Raptor, which I believe is the oldest completed Pokemon fan game. As impressive as it was back in the day, the game has not aged very well, with dozens of issues like a horrible level curve, super slow animations, and a very basic region and story. I wish I had something nice to say about it, but it's a game that should just be left to the past. I can't really put it any higher than D tier, but I'm still glad it existed as a stepping stone for the future of the fan game scene. Pokemon Reloaded, the fan game with real-time combat. It's an absolutely huge game with hundreds of hours of content across multiple different regions, and over 40 gym leaders. The combat system is very fun, controlling your own Pokemon, aiming their attacks, and being able to dodge ones at your own will. It's easily the best part about the game, but I do feel that some of the battles can take way too long, to the point where you can play this game for a whole hour and barely feel like you made any progress. Outside of the gameplay, the story is nothing to write home about, and feels like a 2012 ROM hack where every evil team is just shoved in for fun. I feel like it didn't do much more than just add unnecessary time to your playthrough. I think it's a great game, but I just can't see myself putting it any higher than A tier. Pokemon Reborn is a massive fan game with 18 gyms and an over 80-hour main story, followed by a massive post-game. But it's also arguably one of the most disliked Pokemon fan games ever made, for complaints about its edgy dialogue, grindy gameplay, and just how easy it is to get lost or find yourself confused on where to go next. But I think most of these complaints come from people that haven't played the game since before its completed release in 2022. Now, this release was very important because other than just finishing the game, it also included a massive update to most of its early story content and dozens of new quality of life and anti-grind measures with the password system. The only criticism I can find valid is that unless you've learned about the game through one of my videos or were previously involved with the community, you wouldn't have known about this system for your first playthrough. So I highly suggest scrolling through the official wiki before jumping into the game. But I'm going to be putting Pokemon Reborn in the S tier, because even if you weren't a fan of the story, I still think there's a ton of fun to be had with its field effects and huge world to explore. We've already got another game to go rate in the S tier, but this time, it's one that for me, stands above every completed fan game I've ever played, and that's Realidea System. What makes this game so good isn't an intricate battle system or super deep story, rather a perfectly balanced adventure set in a very beautiful region. The world is decorated with a Generation 5 art style that's handled almost perfectly, with nothing feeling out of place. The Pokemon variety consists of the first 7 generations, which are spread out very well, so you won't have any issues building your team. And the story is very fun, with tons of charming characters, and a plot focused around a machine that can create artificial bonds between people and Pokemon. To top it all off, the difficulty hits that sweet spot where it still has an ounce of challenge to it, while also allowing any Pokemon to feel successful. It's definitely the highest amount of visual quality you'll currently find in a completed fan game that still retains the aspects that make Pokemon fun. It absolutely belongs at the very top of the S tier. But created by the same developer, we have Pokemon Reminiscencia, and like Realidea System, it's of course incredibly visually pleasing, with beautifully animated character portraits, and a stunning overworld. Now, if this were a normal adventure, it would probably be placed even higher than the previous game, with its entertaining story, and like I said before, amazing graphics. But Reminiscencia is a roguelike, and while that's not a problem, I wasn't really a fan of how it plays. Basically, rather than traveling through a set route, you venture through small rooms or open areas, with randomized items, wild Pokemon, and trainers. Where my interest kind of dies is that Pokemon don't level up, as they instead evolve and learn new moves through heart scales. In hindsight, it's not too big of a deal, but as someone who really enjoys that side of progression in these games, I'm going to be putting it in the lower S tier. It's still an incredible game though, that I think is worth trying for any Pokemon fan. Back with another fairly simple game, we have Poketale. This game advertises itself as Pokemon meets Undertale, but I found it to feel more like Pokemon with Undertale characters and music. You go on an adventure across a new region and collect 8 gym badges. You do have access to quality of life like the EXP All, Pokevile, and portable PC, so your adventure will feel very smooth. But other than the regional starters, I can't say there's anything else that makes this game special. Gonna put it in the C tier. Not a bad game, and will definitely keep you busy if you have nothing else to play. We're getting to the point where I'm starting to ask myself, why have I played so many Pokemon fan games? Oh right, because they're fun. And if you also like fun, then make sure to subscribe, because I upload a video at least once a week showcasing Pokemon fan games or ROM hacks. But moving on to Pokerogue, this is a fan game I'm sure everyone who clicked on this video knows about. And despite how stupid fun the game can be, I'm personally not too big of a fan of it, as the lack of a new story, or even a region to explore, just drags down my ability to enjoy it for more than 10 minutes at a time. So Pokerogue's going in the B tier. Not a bad game at all, just one I didn't enjoy so much. Another very basic but polished fan game is Pokemon Nightmare. I have pretty similar opinions to this as Shattered Light, a short, casual-friendly fan game. Nothing wrong with it, but might not be your best bet if you're looking for something more unique, so I'll be putting it in the C tier. Next up on the list is Pokemon Mega Adventure, which might just be the most sauceless Pokemon game I've ever played. And trust me, that's not something I enjoy saying. The maps are put together using default tiles in a very uninteresting way, and the Pokemon battles are very boring with the AI just spamming random moves. And while the developer does admit that English isn't their first language, that didn't seem to be the issue with the story, rather than the fact that it was just very basic. Every character interaction felt like it was no more than just 2 or 3 sentences. It's not really a game I can suggest anyone to play, especially with the massive amount of completed fan games that already exist, so I will be putting it all the way down in the D tier. On a bit more of a positive note is Legends of the Arena, a sort of mixed bag of a fan game in terms of quality. I really liked its story, taking you through a series of tournaments rather than gyms, and it was written pretty well. On top of that, the Pokemon variety and map designs are pretty good, but I think it's held back by its Pokemon battles, which is kind of ironic since that's the main focus of the story. You'll find that most moves just don't have any animations, and your opponent spamming random ones throws all strategy out the window. The encounter rates, especially in the early game, are incredibly high. I felt like I couldn't go anywhere without a massive stock of repels. It's another game I wish I could put higher, but it just hasn't aged too well, leaving me with no other choice than the C tier. Infinite Fusion. arguably one of the most popular fan games ever created, mostly because it features a gimmick that allows you to fuse any two Pokemon. This is easily one of my favorite features in any fan game, as you're essentially just creating new Pokemon with new stats and movesets. Not to mention the tens of thousands of custom designs that look incredible. Just for that alone, I'd love to put it in S tier. But I feel like the rest of the game is a bit on the mediocre side. There isn't really much of a story, which is fine, but traveling through Kanto for the 100th time is a bit demotivating, especially with the Generation 5 tiles being used in a way that doesn't really do the style any justice. It will go into the high A tier, as I still think it's a really good game. Alright, we've got another big one, Pokemon Insurgence. This game got a lot of praise and attention back in the day, which makes sense due to it being a completed project in 2017 and having over 200 new regional forms of existing Pokemon. But I feel like it just hasn't aged too well, with its lack of easily accessible quality of life, a huge amount of Delta forms being locked to the post-game, and some of the worst music choices I've ever seen in a fan game. So I will be placing it in the low B tier. Pokemon Itinerant. Similarly to Shattered Light, it's got a very basic story where you travel the region, collect 8 gym badges, and stop a not so interesting evil team. But it does have very well put together maps, using an enhanced Generation 3 art style, as well as the EXP all, Pokemon from all 9 generations, and terrestrialization. Although the game is very easy, so taking advantage of those mechanics, the battles will be a complete walk in the park. I am going to put it in the low B tier, because I did very much enjoy the region layout and quality of life. Pokemon Infinity. This game is absolutely incredible. The world is very pretty and fun to explore, with a boatload of side areas. The Pokemon battles are very fun with just how many regional forms, Fakemon, and even Digimon there are for you to use. And with the password system you can access at the start of the game, there's just so much customization that allows you to create the perfect Pokemon adventure. The only thing I didn't enjoy so much about it would probably be its story, especially towards the end. But it's not a bad story, and it's definitely not something that comes close to dragging down the experience as a whole. Easy S tier, one of the best completed fan games ever made. Now, have you ever wondered what a Sevii Island storyline in the Heart Gold Soul Silver games would have looked like? Well, with HGSS Sevii, now you can. It'll start you off in the Sevii Islands with a story surrounding Team Rocket, followed by a post-game set in the Hoenn region. But as good as that sounds, there were two things that dragged down my enjoyment. First, the game starts you in the mid-level 30s, with enough Pokemon to not really need to catch any more. You get 3 starters, some almost fully evolved Pokemon, and a couple legendaries. This made battles fun for a bit, but eventually I got bored of not really needing to capture new team members. Secondly, the game doesn't perform very well, which is mostly due to it being built on a very old version of Pokemon Essentials. These might seem like silly nitpicks to others, but to me, stuff like this really matters. So while HGSS Sevii is still a good game, it will be going in the B tier for me. Next up is Floral Tempus, another sort of not bad, but not groundbreaking kind of game, where you go on a journey to collect gym badges and defeat an evil team. This one has a lot of content though, with Pokemon from the first 8 generations, and a massive region with 12 gyms instead of 8. The story is also pretty decent. What I really didn't enjoy about the game though, is just how bland the battle scene looks, especially when it looked more like this on a previous version. Overall, it can sit safely in the B tier, as I do think it can serve you a good experience. Up next, we have Eon Guardians. Like many others on this list, its region and story are pretty average. Not bad, but nothing crazy. What does very much stand out about this game are the Pokemon battles. While it only features the first 4 generations, they've all received various changes to their stats, learnable moves, and/or abilities. The battles are definitely fun, and because of the game's simplicity, I think it's easily one of the best fan games for newcomers to the scene to start with. It'll go right in the A tier, as I do really like the focus on Pokemon battles, while still having a nice new region to explore. Out of all the fan games I've played, there are very few that have offered a truly unique experience with their storytelling. One that has though is Pokemon Empyrean. While you do start out as another trainer trying to challenge the gym leaders, you'll quickly find yourself wrapped up in a very intricate and sometimes confusing story that takes you across a massive region and even further beyond it. However, I found the Pokemon side of the game to be kind of boring, as most moves do lack animations, and the late game can be especially grindy. But with its interesting plot, region, and handful of regional forms, I definitely think it deserves at least A tier. Pokemon Bushido. Another somewhat average game, but this time around, you aren't just another gym challenger. Instead, you're the child of a royal samurai, tasked with visiting each of the major villages in the region. One thing I really like about the game is that it actually incorporates shadow Pokemon into the story, and does so pretty well. But while the region was fun to explore, I didn't find anything super special about the Pokemon battles. Overall, I think it's a pretty above average game that can go right into the high B tier. Up next is Pokemon Bazaar. The one thing I had on my mind while playing this is that the creator definitely had a lot of fun putting this game together, because it is very goofy, with its characters, town names, and music choices. But even with how silly the game is, it's still very polished, with a pretty region, and a very good Pokemon variety, with even a few regional variants and Fakeamon as well. The only downside I can think of is that the game isn't very difficult, so unless you seriously lack team building skills, it's not something I can see anyone struggling with. But I think it deserves a spot in the A tier as it is just a really fun game. Next up is Pokemon Africanus, and I apologize if I mispronounced that. But this is a really interesting fan game, taking place in ancient Europe. The world was very fun to explore, as it was obviously a lot more unique than the normal Pokemon regions I've traveled through. While the story does take you through a gym challenge, the stakes were much higher, as you're doing so to become stronger to help your region win a war. As for the gameplay, you'll have Pokemon from all 9 generations to capture, and thanks to the multiple difficulty modes, I had a lot of fun with the gym battles. It's a very unique, but also very polished fan game that I think definitely belongs in the A tier. Nearing the end of the list, Pokemon Alchemist. This is a pretty old fan game, originally released all the way back in 2016, and for its time, it was very impressive. The world is mapped pretty well, and while the story and Pokemon variety are average, they again were impressive for their time. But almost 10 years later, and I can't say it's aged very well, especially considering how poorly the game performs, causing tons of lag in most of the outdoor maps. So it will be going in the C tier. Second to last, Pokemon Abstract. It's another fan game where you play as a gym challenger, but this time it's open world, meaning you could take on any gym leader in any order. Well, not really, as my biggest issue with the game is that it felt more non-linear than open world, as a lot of areas were still locked behind story or gym progression. However, that is more of a personal nitpick than anything else. But I think the rest of the game, including its maps and story, is pretty average, which makes sense because it was made for a game jam. So while what exists is impressive for the short window given to develop it, I will be placing it in the C tier. This list started with one of the first completed fan games I've ever played, and interestingly enough, it's going to end with the latest one, and that's Pokemon Awakening. It's a game that I had my eyes on for quite a bit before its English release, and having finally been able to play it, I can say it certainly lived up to my expectations. The story is very unique, as you'll travel across the world trying to seal away various treasures before they fall into the wrong hands. The Pokemon battles are very fun, as you'll not only have Pokemon from all 9 generations, but also a class system that allows you to cast special abilities on your Pokemon or the enemies. And there's just so much quality of life, including an EXP haul that also seeps into your storage boxes. Between all that and its beautiful region, it's an easy S tier for me, and it's just another example of how far the fan game scene has really come. So after all that, you might be wondering what I need in a Pokemon game to enjoy it. Personally, I kind of just want a balanced adventure. I want each aspect of the game to feel tended to, and if you want to give me a super animated story or a crazy new battle system alongside it, then that's great. But when you start to ignore region design or graphical appeal in favor of that, then my interest starts to waver. But at the end of the day, this is my list, so don't let my opinions stop you from enjoying your favorite fan games that I myself might not have enjoyed as much. And one more thing, I did also decide to exclude a few games that I either didn't play very much of, or were just too short for me to fairly compare them to the longer games on the list. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you're looking forward to my ROM hack version, then definitely make sure you subscribe. Thank you to my channel members for their continued support, and have a nice rest of your day.